Great, so we can see people flooding into the room. Welcome everybody to day 2 of Conference 21, Zooms and Rooms. London Funders does like an alliteration or a rhyming title. We'll just give everyone a few minutes to come in. We've had over 100 people sign up for the virtual sessions this week, and another 100 sign up for the in real life sessions next week. So it's great to see so many of you here. Just give another minute or so, and we'll dive in. So I'm just going to start now. I'm just going to say welcome to everybody. I'm Geraldine Blake. I'm the Director of Collaboration at London Funders. This is our conference. This is some virtual sessions this week, the Zooms, and then the rooms next week, some in real life sessions to pull out what did these conversations mean. We're really excited that so many of you have signed on to join us after a year and a half of Zoom. You must be totally exhausted, but I think we've got some great panels this week, in particular the fantastic panel today. So I'm really, really pleased to be joined by Alistair from School for Social Entrepreneurs, Fadi from the Muslim Charities Forum, Sarah from Migration Exchange, and Jero from Barking and Dagenham Giving. Our audience here today are funders from across different sectors. We've got public, private and corporate philanthropic, and together you are part of the 180 members of London Funders, who together give away £500 million across London's communities. And we know that our members want to do it well, which is why we are holding these events and why you are joining us. And that's what we're hoping to help with over the next 90 minutes. So just a few of the technical bits about how it's going to work. So this is a webinar. You can see us, but we can't see you, and you can't see each other. There is a chat function below, and you can use that to say hello or post links or have a conversation, and we'll share any resources that you post with people afterwards. There's also a Q&A box at the bottom, so this is where you put questions for our panel. And it'd be really difficult for us to keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A box, so that's going to be the only one that I'm going to be looking at. So put your questions in there, and you can also see the questions that other people have asked, and you can use a thumbs up thing to move their question up to the top if you think it's a particularly good question. Twitter, if you're on social media, we'd encourage you to be sharing your thoughts and reflections as we go through. The hashtag is Camference21, that's Camference as in camera rather than conference. Another one of London Funders' little witticisms and timings. The event finishes at 11:30. We'll aim to finish a bit early so that you've got time you've got a couple of minutes before your next Zoom. And this is the second session of 3 this week, and then next week there are 5 sessions, and at the end of our session today, one of the chairs from next week's session is just going to join us and say a little bit about what people can expect next week. So I think I've covered all the technicals there. I think we can dive in. This is a conversation about collaboration and connection. We know that over the last year, collaboration between funders just went through the roof. I mean, the London community response, we think, was probably the biggest funder collaboration in the UK, definitely in London, but possibly in the UK. So we've got lots of questions. We've got people who are really experienced in doing collaborations at all levels. And I'm going to start with a really open question. We couldn't have done last year. We couldn't have responded to the crisis in the way that we did without collaboration. Where do we go next? How do we build on that? What's the next thing that we can, what should our ambition be after that? Who'd like to volunteer to go first on that question? Jero, you've got your...
Yeah, sure. Happy to kick off. So first of all, I'm Jero Deville. I run Barking and Dagenham Giving, which is a place-based giving organization. We sort of came out of an initiative from the council in collaboration with a number of local stakeholders in Barking and Dagenham. And this was all recognizing that the kind of funding landscape had changed, and then Barking and Dagenham had been struggling to attract funding for many years, and in many ways still is. I think for me, what's been interesting last year to observe is how funders came together, and we are in a way we are a funder as well ourselves, but we're also a grantee, so we are in a very interesting position to kind of see the trends. But people coming together, funders coming together to throw the rulebook away and streamline processes to get money very quickly where it was needed was absolutely essential. A lot of the organizations, small voluntary groups that we're working with, were really struggling, in the midst of the pandemic, even to pay, £1,000 to pay their rent, and were, threatening to go under. And sometimes these groups have been operating for many years, and there was a need to sort of remove the stiffness and control that you normally have with, funding, to embrace a bit more pragmatism and trust. And I think that was really, really effective last year. I think the flip side of this is perhaps that we have less understanding overall on the impact of some of that money that has been distributed. Obviously, there's been less control, and so there's a lot of. There seems to be, at least from a Barking and Dagenham's perspective, sometimes a discrepancy between how much money was said to be available in the borough and what we've observed on the ground. And I think that's a challenge for us moving forward. And I would say perhaps what would be important as we think where do we go next is to think how can we keep what's been really good about the response, that collaboration and that sense of making things easier from a charity's perspective, but also ensuring there's sufficient understanding of the impact of that joint effort. And yeah, I don't have an answer to that question. I think it's a question for all of us.
It's a really good question, and we should definitely come back to it. And there were. It would actually be really useful to hear a bit about how everyone collaborated in crisis before we start thinking about what does that mean for collaboration outside of crisis. So the points you're making there about trust and speed, but not being able to measure things in the funders are used to doing. Ali, do you want to say a bit about what was your crisis collaboration? Yours perhaps wasn't quite so much crisis led.
Oh, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah, good to be here, everyone. I'm Ali from the School for Social Entrepreneurs. Yeah, Geraldine, obviously we were very reliant on London funders in the whole piece, and I'll explain why in a minute. Social enterprises, trading, charities, and community businesses were absolutely hollowed out in this pandemic because, arguably, traded income, depending on whether it was a B2C thing or a B2B thing, absolutely ground to a halt. So the sector and funders for the last, as long as I've been involved, 22 years, have encouraged people to, diversify their income, pursue a good mix, de-risk their fundraised income, et cetera, et cetera. So we've always pushed the sector to trade and earn income. And then all of a sudden, they couldn't trade and they couldn't earn income. So we were really put in a difficult position. We've been a funder for kind of in Gerard's way, we're in receipt of funds, but also we distribute funds on behalf of others usually. But we could see this situation happening overnight with social enterprises, trading, charities, and community businesses having to close because of the pandemic. So we had to do something, and we had to do something really quick. But London funders were hotter off the mark than we were, probably on the back of all the lessons you had learned from Grenfell and the collaboration that happened through Grenfell. So you managed to get this London fund up and running. And at the same time, we were speaking to the lottery about this whole problem that was happening to social enterprise. So we just approached London funders and said, look, is there any chance we could pretty much nick what you've done in the heat of the crisis? And, London funders were incredible and generous and just said, yeah, go for it, take everything. So we did the equivalent mini scheme for, trading, charities, social enterprises, and community businesses. And we got together, there was 5 of us at the end of the day. So Unlimited, Key Fund, Big Issue Invest, and Resonance, and School for Social Entrepreneurs. And we distributed, I think it was 20 odd million, over a kind of 12-week period. So it was quite a lot, quite quickly, relatively small grants, under 30K each. And that was a brilliant experience. I mean, it was kind of full on, but, really, really worthwhile. And we it's very difficult to work out how many we saved from going to the wall, but it was deemed to be a super success. And we managed a lot of, we managed to reach a good diverse bunch in places. It was UK wide, it wasn't just London. Your question really, Geraldine, was where next? Well, to my mind, and how do we, if you like, cement this collaboration and draw it together? Well, there's a very obvious where next, and it's tech, and it's data, and it's insights, and it's policy, because it's about helping government understand where, the trust and foundation world and other, whether it be corporate foundations, they can do a bit and they can help with these innovations and these trials, but the heavy lifting in the long term, the state has got to play a part in. And therefore, the idea of quite a lot of money going out quite quickly in collaboration allows us the opportunity to draw together the learning threads through tech, big data, which has never been really possible easily before, and take those arguments to policymakers and bolster the arguments for them playing their part. So I think, in my mind, tech and data and policy and bringing government to the table is the obvious answer to where next.
Yes. Let's. I'm going to park those, and we're going to come back to them. But great answer. Fadi.
Hi, good morning.
Tell us about your experience of collaboration.
Thank you, Charlie. My name is Fadi Itani. I'm the CEO of the Muslim Charities Forum. And unlike the rest of the colleagues, we're not really a funder as such. We're actually more of a connector. So we during the pandemic, and this is something we do before, is actually we acted like a bridge between funders and the organizations who are delivering for the different communities across the country. What we've seen there and what we can learn, all of us, from is something I always use, and I will probably maybe not going to stop using it, is bridges are built from 2 sides, not from 1 side. And so there need to be willingness on the funders side, on organizations who are receiving or organizations facilitating infrastructure organizations such as MCA, the Muslim Charities Forum. During the pandemic, we were, and sorry to use this word, we were forced to work together. We were forced to collaborate. And I know we stepped up, all of us, and this was good. And we basically went into spaces and experiences that we never done before, all of us. And I think we need to build on what we've done to make sure that this become a norm, not the exception. What we learned there is basically, it is possible. We can cut a lot of red tapes. We can clarify the things for people and communities we're serving. We can, as my colleague Alistair just said, we can share data, we can share basically good practices and so on, and think this is the way forward. Let's make it basically the regular, the norm, not the exceptional, that we work together when there is a crisis and when there is, we are forced to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings up a whole new area of discussion that we'll revisit. And in our session yesterday, which was on power and participation, this question about, collaborating, not just funders collaborating together, but collaborating across different sectors, and how we do that in a genuinely equal way without hierarchies, and how do we recognize that all of the bits are really important. We can't do it on our own. Sarah, how was the pandemic for you in terms of the collaborations you're supporting?
Hi everyone, nice to be here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My name's Sarah, and I support an informal funder network called Migration Exchange, which is a national network focused on migration, public attitudes, and it's been around for about a decade, and it's been a tool for fund and a space for funders and organisations working on migration and refugee issues to come together to try and build a systemic and strategic response to the problems around migration and public attitudes, and to try and bolster the way in which the field can respond to the political and public narratives that really undermine the UK offering a welcoming and safe place for people from all backgrounds. So it's got quite a long history of funders working together through aligning, through shared analysis, and through sharing relationships with organisations in the field. In the pandemic, we quickly pivoted to understanding that we would need to do something around frontline organisations. So we just finished a piece of mapping looking at the shape and size of the infrastructure and resources of independent funding and of the charity sector focused on these issues. So we accelerated that. So we then had the data to develop a programme, and our kind of driving objective was to really try and make sure that, yes, we got some support out to small organisations so that they could withstand the immediate risks coming from the pandemic, but that we would have something at the end of it that would respond to some of the kind of structural challenges that the field faces. So we didn't distribute a huge amount of money. It was around £2.5 million, but we worked with Refugee Action and NACOM, which is an anti-destitution charity, to distribute the grants in a very different way than the funders who were putting it into the programme would normally have used. And we really, I think Alistair talked about the sort of power of data, and I think we really tried to approach it through a more equitable distribution of resources. So we knew very quickly that the government wouldn't include people subject to immigration control in their response, and that was the case. So people were excluded from the social support and economic support that was available. So, for example, universal credit uplift was £20 a week. Asylum seeking support was £1.85. Which is barely enough to buy a bottle of hand sanitizer. And around 3 or 4 million people in the UK with now no recourse to public funds have continued to have no recourse to public funds throughout the pandemic. So the organisations doing the frontline work are always critical, but they became a whole new level of critical. We distributed support through a data-driven analysis which showed us where people were in the country, which cohorts of people in which parts of the immigration system and how they'd be affected. And we really drew on the wisdom and experience of people in the field, people who've been through the immigration system themselves, people working in communities, to say, these are the direct and indirect impacts that we think COVID will have. And then we laid that over analysis from Doctors of the World and IPPR and some independent public health experts who also understood very quickly the disproportionate impact that the pandemic would have on Black and minoritized communities. So we did an invite only fund. We only approached, we built a kind of snowball list of who was working where and tried to roughly distribute according to the numbers of people in the different parts of the system. So for example, there's many times more people who have no recourse to public funds than there are unaccompanied asylum seeking children, for example. So we were trying to get some sense of addressing some of the problems that can come if you only give to who applies. And by working with the charities that we worked with, we were able to create space for people to come together. So the program we developed was called Respond and Adapt, and we've had 12 bulletins over the last 18 months or so that captured the frontline issues through a survey, and then provided an online space where we had ranging between sort of 70 and 100 people coming together who are working on the ground, and funders who are supporting them, to say, this is what we're seeing. So at the beginning it was, perspex screens and face masks, and where are we going to get money from to pay for a laptop for a key member of staff. Now it's much more about how do we keep going when we're all exhausted? How do we deal with the fact that this, we're having racial hate targeted towards our organisation? So I think the three things I just wanted to highlight about where we go next are based on that experience. So one is around trust. I think Gerard mentioned that word, and I think shifting from collaborating outside emergencies to collaborating inside, the amount of trust you already have allows you to run as fast as you can, but it needs constant attention, and it doesn't withstand not paying attention. So after a crisis, if you don't recontract and rebuild trust for the non-crisis context, I think that's a problem. So I think we need to pay attention to how we keep paying attention to trust. I think love and connection is the most powerful collaboration tool. So people work together because they care deeply about the same thing, and that cuts through a lot of the pain of working together with people over the long term. And if you're guided by the insight and wisdom of people who are doing the work in the field and who've been through that themselves, I think that really helps. And then the final thing I want to say that we can build on, I think, is it relates to Alistair's point about data, but I think it's knowing the limits of what you know, as well as being clear about the data that you do have, is really important. So really checking assumptions, questioning, why don't we know about that? Who's not in the room? How can we be more proactive? Because I think collaboration outside of crisis, that drive to be proactive can disappear, and we start to sort of sit back and wait. And I think that there's equity and power issues at play, but I think there are ways around that.
That's great, Sarah. Thank you. There's so much in all of those answers. We could dive in anywhere. I'm really interested in your points, Sarah and Fadi, about the connecting with people who aren't other funders and bringing them into our collaborations, and doing that in a way which respects their knowledge and their intelligence, the intelligence that they bring to the collaborations, but which also acknowledges that these people are often working in underfunded organisations where there has been no investment in infrastructure. In the London Community Response, we had a group of equity partners who worked with us, who worked with funders to design the programmes, to design the process, to help train funders in how to do assessments differently, and eventually sat on a decision-making panel for the pooled fund. And those organisations were paid for their time, but that they were all organisations who were had been working on a shoestring for such a long time. So being able to scale up to have that engagement and to now have ongoing engagement with funders is, we're making a really big shift really fast, I think. And it was really interesting in the session yesterday, Yvonne from New Bailey saying, this is a very small first step on a very long journey. So how can funders, recognizing that, how do we bring those kinds of organizations with us on a collaborative journey when we have so many resources and they have so few? How do we do it in a way where where we're addressing some of those hierarchy issues and we're doing it in a way that's equal? Fadi, did you want to go on that?
If I may. I think I can use like a case study from what we've done during the pandemic. Our work with the London Community Foundation, LCF, was a real example of, we were actually responding and trying to help the communities both in London and across the country. And the LCF, they actually also were doing, of course, wonderful work. They had an issue of, they want to increase the reach to more organizations who, in a way, they never really access mainstream funding, and they were responding wonderfully to basically and doing amazing work across the country and in London specifically, serving different communities from their own resources, and especially when we talk about faith-based community organizations. And LCF really, they had what you call it, they were so eager that they want to do something, and this is where they reached out, and then we actually built, as I say, the bridge together to make sure that this happened. It wasn't easy for them and for us, because, as you said, we overstretched during the response, lack of resources and so on. But this is where the funders, and I actually, my call here to all our colleagues around the table and those who are on the call, on the webinar, we really need to be careful of, if we stick too much to the rules, we will actually be missing a lot of organizations that they should be supported. So we need to be flexible, especially during crisis, and understand that there is a good organization there that all what they need, a helping hand to make sure we connect with them, and they are actually, we give them a helping hand to connect better and more with the communities they are serving. And it wasn't difficult, it just need the will. We have to, and we had to dedicate really resources and time for this, because otherwise we keep talking about, we need to work together, we need to cut duplication and repetitions and so on. But how this will happen if we don't really step forward and start taking some difficult decisions, I have to say. And for our colleagues who are leading funders and leading funding organizations and organizations who are delivering services, they have a duty as leaders of those organizations to make some difficult decisions sometimes that actually strategic, and they will help our sector on the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that we've has become really, really clear during the pandemic has been the value of infrastructure organizations who are able to do that reach. Gero, for you, you're working at a very, very local level, hyper local. Local authority, one local authority level, which isn't that hyper local. But so does that mean you're closer to? Are you able to have a different kind of conversation with the groups that you're supporting? Are you able to do participation in a way that's just not possible at a national level?
I think so, and I think we get a right amount of challenges as well from our small groups. I think it's helpful to indicate that embarking in Dagenham, so the local profile of social organization, the social sector, is a little bit different perhaps than in other areas. So we've got the majority of our voluntary and community groups are very, very small groups with turnovers of less than £100,000, which again, is quite different from some other areas of London. We've got a few large organizations who are quite successful and manage to attract funding, but the bulk of our sector really attracts very small grants in general. And I suppose it's been a challenge for them, for some groups for many years. I think, and it's also kind of fed a sense of grievance in a way. So we're dealing with multiple issues there. There's a lot of kind of mistrust between small organizations and funders themselves. Sometimes there's mistrust between small and large organizations. There might be mistrust sometimes across Barking and Dagenham, with certain parts of the borough being able to attract funding, whereas others are seen as not able to attract funding. And so what we're doing as part of our role is to really try and bridge, and I like what Fadi was saying earlier about that metaphor with the bridges, bridge between really those who have access to resources and those who need access to resource. And I think, as you said, Geraldine, social infrastructure is absolutely essential. So we are, Barking Dagenham Giving is a small organization where we've got some funding to distribute, but to give you a sense of scale, last year we distributed just shy of £200,000, which was our first year of operation. But we're relying on other social infrastructure organizations in the borough, and we're actually working very closely together. So the Barking and Dagenham Collective, for instance, has been set up as a network of networks, and their purpose is really to sort of build collaboration across specific sectors. Take, for instance, the youth network. And what we do is we try to provide funding for these sort of network activities and demonstrate that it can be a way forward for funders who want to reach out to smaller groups in Barking and Dagenham. I can give you perhaps one example. We've taken some of our own funding recently and approached the youth network, which includes 40 other organizations in Barking and Dagenham. And we said, there is 50K. We want to put this on the table, and we would like you, the network, to self-select 4 or 5 organizations who are going to work on a pilot project with us across a few months, to decide how that money can be spent to support the network itself, how it can be spent to really support capacity and capability in that network. And then take that as an example to demonstrate perhaps to other funders and perhaps to also businesses, that this is a way forward to work with very small groups in Barking and Dagenham. And it's been absolutely fascinating the way the process happened. And so when we started, for instance, we came up to the network and we actually, as funder, pitched the idea. So instead of having organizations apply for funding to us, we actually were in a mode where we were trying to sell our idea and saying, can we do this together? Please, how would it work for you? And they set some of the conditions for, working with them, which was an interesting way of kind of flipping that traditional hierarchy that you would have between funder and grantee. We also agreed that the accountability wouldn't be just to us as a funder, but would be towards the whole network. So we wanted to do something which was very much in the open and kind of share the learning with the rest of the network. And then also we, very importantly, as a funder, we sort of pre-approved the expense. So we got our board of trustees to pre-approve the expense so that we could come up to, that group and say, look, whatever you decide to do with that money, so long as it's legal, we will sign it off. So you decide and we will sign off. And I think that's a very interesting way. It's still early days for us, but we're really hoping to kind of demonstrate that it can be a way forward for, say, larger funders, perhaps across London or even national funders, to reach out to very small groups in a place like Barking and Dagenham, or as in other places as well.
Yes, absolutely. So a really genuine way of building the bridge from both sides there, and building a bridge with love and connection. The love and connection, I think, is going to take off on Twitter as the thing from this conversation. Sarah, did you want to say more about how we can work without hierarchy?
So I think it's impossible to work without power at play, because it is just there in all our human relationships. But I think naming it, being upfront about it, and not shying away from the conversations that need to be had about it is really important. I think it's also about, collaboration is an absolute necessity. So most of the people that do the really hard work on migration and migration justice collaborate all the time. They just don't get any resources to do it. So and it's a kind of life or death issue often. So the collaboration about stopping a deportation flight or getting someone out of detention is all social change work, involves working together, but it's also a luxury and a privilege to have collaboration paid for, and having people who've got hands and brains to actually do the legwork that is necessary to sustain collaboration and to build strategic and long-term responses to real structural problems and injustice. So I think we need to pay better attention, listen harder, be in the spaces where people are already working together, and then make the support available quickly and not on our terms, on the terms of the people that are doing the work. Because and not ask for them to demonstrate the outcome of a collaboration before they've done it, or prove any attribution later. Just recognize that unless you support people to have the time and the resources to meet with each other, to continue to work together, and to, it's very toxic to have to argue over expenses or resources or who's getting paid and who isn't getting paid in social change work. And we know that inhibits, like my colleague said, that inhibits collaboration. It seeds mistrust and tension in an already resource stretched environment. So I think there are ways of supporting people to do the work, but in a way that's humble and led. It's very hard to fund collaboration if the field isn't collaborating with one another, and we've got to get underneath what's stopping them collaborating. Is it burnout? Is it racism? Is it resources? Is it trust? Is it analysis? Is it data? It's probably a bit of all of those things, and unless we are really clear-eyed about that, I think we risk collaborating for the sake of it, or because it makes us feel good that we're working together. But actually the strategic purpose is not, the answer to the problem is not always collaboration. But I think and collaboration can run its course, and we should kill things that don't continue to serve the goal. There's no shame in saying we did that, we worked together with those people, it was justifiable then because we were in a crisis. It's absolutely not justifiable now. So I would never create a partnership now off the back of a one-pager overnight with two organisations that I knew had brilliant links, because it's not an emergency setting at this moment that would justify that kind of working without that level of consultation and speed. But I think we have to constantly reflect on the rationale for what we're doing, and be really clear that the goal of collaboration is not to make our lives easier or make us feel good that we know what everyone else is doing. It's about the people doing the work being able to get the resources to connect in a way that they are often already doing. It's just not seen, and it's not valued, and it's not paid for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's as somebody who has collaboration in my job title, it's a really good question to say, actually, when do you not need to be collaborating, and when really keep focusing on that. What's the goal? Why are we doing it? Where is it we can do something more together than we can do on our own? And when I say we, I'm not just talking about funders doing more together. It's about the whole system. And just reflecting, Sarah, on your point about that trust requires attention. I think I've had this conversation with you before. I often feel like my job as somebody who enables collaboration is just literally to have lots and lots and lots of chats with people. It often doesn't feel like you're really doing anything big. What you're doing is kind of setting up for people to meet with each other, or making sure that that information has got to that person and that information has been shared there. It's quite a processy driven thing to support connection between people. Do you, Ali, what's your experience of working with, you have some of the enterprises involved in the steering group, don't you, for the collaborations that you do?
Oh yeah, I think so. You're talking about the match trading task force. So yeah, that's interesting in terms of, if you like, how do we break through from the kind of old paternalistic model of bringing in voices and representation? How do we break through to something more meaningful and which actually addresses power issues? I mean, this kind of fascinates me as a subject area. I think two things are bubbling up which really make this more possible. So one is, you know, in London Funders, both in the Grenfell situation and in the COVID situation, you know, tech is an incredible leveler. You know, there's presumably around the table, Geraldine, you had some funders who were giving away, you know, tens of millions per year. And you had other funders who had a budget of giving away, I don't know, 100 or 200 grand a year. And yet tech allowed them to, within a framework, take their own decisions. And I think that's really interesting because it means that the age-old thing of, you know, we understand this is very complicated. We must hold all the, you know, the real power. We must hold the bank account. We must hold the money. We must take the ultimate decisions. There's ways of bleeding power now using tech to allow all sorts of groups to begin to participate and to begin the long, hard journey of capacity building and skills development, etc. So the thing you're referring to there, match trading, which is a kind of, the way it's really an incentive, it's a grant scheme that works on an incentive basis to encourage people to build their traded income by rewarding them pound for an uplift in their traded income with grant income. And we have a terrific task force, which is actually chaired by Carol Mack of ACF, with about 20 different funders and government and various people around the table. London Funders is around there as well. And what's interesting about that is the opportunity to get, for instance, whether it be LGBT groups or BAME groups or disabled groups, to not come and advise about how that funding's given out, but skilled up to begin to become our funding partners, take part of the pot and take those decisions. Now, that doesn't negate our responsibility to make sure we get good reach in what we do. I mean, it's a key part of our strategy and we're very good at it, but it allows us to boost it even further by having people who can come to the table who will achieve 100% of the target group we're looking at. And I think tech really enables us to allow to do that in smaller amounts earlier on and build the skills so that we can get out of this sort of paternalistic approach of saying, oh, you know, please come and sit around the table and advise us as to how we should be doing this, which, I mean, come on, you know, that is not a serious attempt at distributing power. There's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way that actually is the sharing of power. And I think tech is quite a leveler in that sense. Certainly the London Funders and the way that system worked, which meant all the participating funders retained their power to take their decisions. And that's a really interesting open window to bringing in other groups with other experiences who really understand the problems in their communities.
Mm. Yes. And you built on the London Funders portal, you built a lot of additional tech ability into it, so that actually the journey for an organisation applying is even even more simple in that they can track all sorts of things, can't they? Not just the initial grant. And you've got it generating some great data about things.
So there's two different things. So one is our kind of social enterprise support fund, which we did with those partners I mentioned earlier, which was lottery distribution. And then there's another thing which is entirely different, which is this group of 20 odd organizations do this match trading stuff. And that's a separate thing. It's a bit more complicated because the punters who receive the grants have got to report on their traded income as they go. So it means they need logins as well. So normally on our big tech distribution system, the punters would fill out an application form, and the people who would need logins, like London Funders System, would be the funders. But with match trading, because the grant is distributed depending on their performance, all the punters need logins as well. So I mean, one, it's more complicated, but two, the data and impact evidence, policy amassing opportunities are massive, really, because it's an aggregation of what's going on. It's complicated. but a really interesting and fascinating journey, which will doubtless end all sorts of. But I mean, I truly believe that's where next is in terms of funder collaboration. Full stop.
Yeah. There's some really exciting stuff coming out of there, I think. And I think one of my reflections on the last 18 months is that Zoom, I think, has been a great tool for collaboration. I've been in rooms with people that I never would have met in real life from all over the place, from all sizes of group, and it managed properly for a much more kind of equitable conversation. So I think there's more that we can build on there. So it feels like we're recognizing that we've done some really good things with collaboration. There's definitely an appetite from our members, definitely, to do more. We need to be really careful about only doing it when it's the right time to do it, not doing it for the sake of doing it. But then I think, this question about kind of, how do we enable funder collaboration, or what does effective funder collaboration look like, is much more than just, some protocols for funders to work together or some nice processes. It's thinking about how we build genuine collaborations across the whole system, and that's a really exciting thing to do. We've got there's a question in the box just come up, which is about is it possible to collaborate well with government? Can we bring them into systemic collaborations, or is that impossible in this climate? Gadi, you're shaking your head.
No, I think is a very good question, and I think we need to put and remind ourselves why we existed and why we, as a sector, what we're supposed to be doing, and then like now we're talking about collaboration, and as rightly Sarah said, sometimes it may be possible, sometimes it may be not. I think we need to be innovative in the way we solve problems in our sector and in our world. And we're not looking at parties, we're looking at partners. So if, the government is an influential, partner in a lot of issues we do in our society, basically from, legislations all the way to funding and so on. Sometimes we think it is difficult. Yes, it is difficult if you become reliant on government funding project, basically. So you become really, you become like more of a delivery agent rather than a change maker organization. So I think when we talk about bridges, we need to build bridges with everyone. And among them, of course, local government, and I think he's got better experience in this, and some central government departments and so on. We can't exclude anybody if we really, our interest and our priority to make a difference and change the situations of people, organizations, and communities we are serving. So we use the tools without being, without being overpowered to just rely on one of those parties or partners.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what works well is a coalition of the willing, bringing people with you who want to come on that journey. And I'm old enough to remember really, really effective collaborations involving government, national government, regional government, local government, all levels. I think it is more challenging now. Giraud, you're working in a local authority, or you've come out from a local authority into the giving partnership, but your local authority is unusual, I think, in the levels of partnering that it does.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can't speak for collaborating with national government, but certainly with the local authority in Barking and Dagenham, it's been quite essential to our work. I mean, we regularly have calls together to try and coordinate action across the borough. Perhaps the fact that, I'm coming out of a local authority helps with this. I've still got quite a few contacts there, former colleagues. I can pick up the phone, which is, speaks to the importance of relationships really between stakeholders and making sure that we, kind of work together to deliver what we set to achieve. But yeah, I think it just, we speak with a lot of, giving schemes across London and organizations, and we all have very different experience. And it seems to me that organizations or schemes that are struggling to really engage with the local authority can face more hurdles at times to deliver. But I would say also that there's a flip side to it. So, being seen as being very close to the local government sometimes is something that can bite us. And so we need to we're constantly kind of navigating that thread between being independent and being able to sort of push back what the local authorities is trying to do, which doesn't necessarily fit with our goals and objectives, and then also being able to work in a very constructive fashion. So I think it's a very important thing to do, to collaborate with the government, but also it raises all sorts of questions when you do it, and then how you do it, I suppose.
So there's a different set of hierarchies with those partners, and a different set of distance needed.
That's right.
At the same time as the love and connection. We've got a couple of questions from Joy Matthew in the box. So we've talked about some of the new ways of approaching collaboration, which are more systemic, which engage the people that we're trying to get resources to, that draw on their intelligence and learning. Some of this might be a bit challenging for an older generation of grant makers because it's about letting go of some power. What's the best way to have these kinds of conversations possibly with some of our trustees? Giraud.
Sorry, I don't want to monopolize the.
Go.
I guess because we're a small organization and a relatively new organization, it is easier for us than it is for more established funders who've had processes in place for many years. But certainly the kind of trustees you work with, and when you recruit trustees, is really important. Having a clear sense of direction of what you're trying to achieve is very important. But now, if you're going to work with existing trustee, I was in a conversation in another meeting looking at governance, and someone brought this saying. I'm just going to bring this up. I think they said, "Good enough for now, safe enough to try," as a principle. So instead of wanting to overhaul the whole kind of funding or granting process, why not try out something, which is very defined, which the trustees can agree on. All right, okay, it's a small amount of money. Let's see what we can learn from doing this. And let's give it some wiggle room so that, it is actually more grantees who are going to help shape, what that funding is used for. And we will use this as an opportunity for us, board of trustees, to kind of learn and see what it means for us as an organization. I think maybe for more established organizations, small steps might be a way forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm a trustee of a grant making foundation. I think we have those conversations about, we collaborate when we can learn something that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Anyone else got any tips on how to have those conversations with trustees? Fadi?
Oh, sorry, Fadi, after you.
No, go ahead. Go, Sarah, please.
No, please.
I think this issue is one of many. Sometimes we find how we can explain things, or how we can basically join forces with our boards and making sure that a journey is basically of learning together is basically shared in here. Because sometimes, on the executive level, and I talk as a CEO, basically, you're running so fast and you're doing a lot of things, and you're touching sometimes things that is not obvious and how to call it, clear for your board. And in a way that this need really some sort of extra efforts to make sure that the experience is shared, and you build you start some sort of a dialogue. And sometimes what is good is you bring external guests with experience to share with your board those kind of examples, because this sometimes it will sound better when it comes from outside the organization rather than from inside. And especially if it's an executive trying to explain to the board, this is what we're trying to do, we need to change this, and so on, etc. It will help to bring really external expertise to highlight and enlighten all of us on this issue.
Yeah, very good point. Sarah.
So yeah, just really quickly wanted to build on that, the question about sort of having uncomfortable conversations. If it doesn't feel uncomfortable at the moment, then you're not having honest conversations. It should feel uncomfortable because things are changing. There's urgency to these issues. So I think funders like to learn, but I also think they should act. So there's that kind of supporting boards of trustees and other people that you work with to take the long view, to think about like where the world might be in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, and to be much more realistic about the role that each funder plays. People, in my experience, often spend a lot of time looking at their own processes and looking in. And I think we have collectively huge responsibility to provide space and resource for people to look ahead and around and think about, do that kind of forecasting, foresight, intel gathering work. And that's also important for relationship with government. There's very different context in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, regional governments around England, and there's so many pressures. I could see something just popped up about climate crisis, exactly, that we haven't got time to just learn slowly, and we need to understand ourselves as part of a system, and some of those systems are very toxic and structurally unequal and racist, and we need to have those conversations. We need to be thinking about the intersection between what we're doing and what others are doing, and if we're not doing that, then I think we're letting down we have the potential to understand the context better and to hear from people who know the issues firsthand, and to invite them into the spaces and go to the spaces where they're already working, and encourage trustees to be exposed to those conversations and thinking, in a way that's resourced and in a way that they're listening and not talking. And I think that that's all stuff that we just have to get comfortable with doing, and many funders do that, but I think we should all be doing it more. And I agree with you, Geraldine, about the sort of potential of using the kind of leveler that is working online, although it can be very difficult for some people in some communities. I think it at least gives us an opportunity to have different perspectives in the room.
That's a great challenge, Sarah. It's a really great challenge. So the point about the funders being, particularly independent funders, I think have that. We have the privilege, don't we, or the potential to make those spaces where we can think about those huge issues that we're trying to tackle together, and to make spaces for people to come together to talk about those. Alistair, you've just come off mute. Are you?
Just thinking what's worked for me in terms of trustees type of discussions in this areas over the years, over a variety of boards. I find the way in is, somebody mentioned in the chat, lived experience. I find the way in for some, people that we should respect who have been in this game for a long time, is to help them understand that lived experience can really maximize the return on the grant. So in other words, the people coming from understanding will use that money in a much more acute and sharp and effective way. So as opposed to going in through a equalities lens particularly, or a targeted lens, to lead the conversation with value for money and effectiveness, hitting an appropriate solution that's popular, that's built to last, that will work well for that community. So taking an effectiveness lens helps some people get on board. That's not to say that lets us off the hook in terms of, for instance, systemic racism, to check after the event exactly what's happened with the money and who's got the money, etc. In terms of trying to bring a bunch of trustees with you in this journey, I find that using a kind of meritocratic effectiveness lens is an easier way in with some people who you might expect more resistance from in terms of devolving power and etc.
Yep, that's really helpful. Really helpful. Any other questions? Please do put them in the box. We've got about 15 minutes left. Geraud, you've written a response to the question about how do funders tackle climate change, and how do we use collaboration as a way? How do we collaborate between funders and others to start to tackle those big issues? I'm keen to understand, what do funders need from organisations like London Funders to enable these kinds of collaborative approaches? I think one of the things I'm thinking immediately is that what funders need sometimes is challenge. So some of the conversation, some of the challenges that you've thrown down today about how funders need to use their power, about building bridges both ways, about love and connection, about if we're not trying to answer difficult questions, if we're not having difficult conversations, we're not having the right conversations. Alice, are you coming in there?
Yeah, just, I mean, I think, you know, what London Funders did over the Grenfell thing and then the COVID recovery thing is, to my mind, if my primary job was a funder, that's exactly what I would want. I would want freedom within a framework, and I would want added value. So I wouldn't want London Funders to come in and tell me how to do my job and try and do it for me. But I'd want them to pull together and galvanize, but also I would want innovation. I would want, you know, the platform. I would want the process. So I would want freedom to do my job within a framework, and you know, tech is a kind of sorry, bang on about tech and data the whole time, but I think that, you know, to help organizations, often much bigger organizations than London Funders with much more staff, there is something about running a teeny little organization like London Funders, which is about agility and speed and innovation. And so, yeah, I mean, I think everyone can agree you've showered yourselves in glory over the last wee while, and long may it continue.
Well, thank you, Ali. I wasn't asking for that kind of response, but that was.
I know you were.
Shiro.
Yeah, not so to pick up on this, I think the point I was making in the response to the climate crisis, it would be amazing if London Funders could help kind of steer that discussion across funders on the sort of total impact that they're having. There's very often a lot of focus, and quite rightly in many ways, on sort of the downstream impact. So whatever do we do with the money that we've managed to distribute in the community. But I think, you know, looking at upstream impact and where we invest is something that's, you know, it's already been a conversation. It's not a new thing, but it is still a very difficult thing for funders to do, is to really sort of clean up their investments. And I think there's certainly a lot of learning that can be done by sharing experiences. We work with some very interesting funders who, you know, have committed to do that. But, you know, even from their perspective and being very progressive on these issues, they find it difficult. So the question is, why is that? And how can we kind of pull our efforts together to be more effective at moving away from harmful investments and look much more at kind of, you know, impact in a much broader sense? Because, you know, together there's so much money invested. There's just so much money out there. So that's the systemic response.
Yeah, very good point. And I think one of the interesting things about London Funders is because we are cross-sector, because we have public sector funders, corporate funders, independent funders, the conversation there about assets is an even more interesting one. Yeah, well, that's we'll put that on the to-do list, Shiro. Fadi or Sarah? How can we do to help?
Fadi and I have been very polite to each other today. So I think for me, there's something about being much more focused on the political context. So I think, you know, we've got a government with a very large majority, but we've got some big social, environmental and economic challenges, and we've got a set of issues around equality and poverty that are mind-boggling, and a government that denies that institutional racism exists. And I think our changed relationship with Europe and the legacy in our day-to-day politics of Brexit and how that's experienced alongside the pandemic is going to be so important to pay attention to over the next period. And I think we can do more to share analysis and questions and gaps and thinking from others in, you know, working on social change in funder spaces, so that we're really, you know, it doesn't mean we're going to have a grant making program around voter registration necessarily, although some funders definitely are in that space, but that we can really have some space to come together about the overarching issues that set the context for all of the work that we do and the partners that we fund are up against. Because as we've seen, things can change very quickly, but some key threads run through a lot of those conversations, a lot of the challenges that we're facing. And so I do think encouraging the long view whilst paying attention to the immediate context and in medium term is something that funders can do well together and invite others into that space. And I suppose an initiative like I was involved in the setup Work with Justice Together initiative, which is focused on a 10-year strategy to try and change the way that access to justice works in the immigration system. And it's, you know, it's taking, the team leading it are taking a really good kind of iterative approach as the challenges change. And we've got, you know, the Afghanistan crisis at the moment changing the legal needs in the sector, but the intention is to work together for at least a decade, because those problems, those challenges need the long view. And so I think, yeah, setting up spaces to work together over the long term and to take account of the political context and the things that I would love to see more of.
Yeah, that is, yeah, absolutely. And Fadi.
I mean, I echo what just Sarah said. And I think navigating on behalf of the funding sector will help a lot, because different, you know, foundations, trusts, and organizations, they busy in their work, doing what they should be doing, and things are changing fast, as Sarah just highlighted, and Sarah, they're changing fast, and they're actually challenging us at the same time. And we're dealing with issues that we never thought that actually they will be coming this fast at us, you know, from the Brexit to now the refugees issues to basically the latest Afghan issues and the implications of those. And at the same time, of course, we mentioned and we spoke briefly about the climate issues, which is no longer something coming, is already, unfortunately, is here. And we no longer that we should be thinking to do something, we should be now doing the things that actually to tackle it. So, and the spaces is very important, because creating those collaborative partnership spaces, and sometimes, you know, certain funders, they want to come together on a specific program or specific project, and others and so on. So maybe not everybody wants to be in one program. So I think the London Funds always will be like navigating really for the sector ahead.
Yeah, that's I think there's some I mean, I feel like we've ranged around quite a lot in this conversation. This format I've preferred to the kind of, you know, you all giving presentations, but we have ranged around. But it feels like you know, the coming back together, you know, collaborate. You know, we're working in a very complex world where things are shifting very quickly, and there are some of those things are really good, and there's potential to kind of really build on those and make sure, and you know, make sure it's not just a fad that we stopped, you know, in a couple of years we all say, oh, that equity thing, so, you know, we want to do something else now. So, you know, making sure those things are really embedded, making sure that we can play our part in tackling some of those really huge issues, and doing that in a way which is which is long term, which is systemic, which is equitable, where there is a process that funders can engage in that's straightforward enough, and which is absolutely supported by data intelligence. And it's, you know, even in the last 5 years, you know, thinking about you know, how funders are responding to the Afghan refugee issue, and how different that is to Grenfell 5 years ago, just in terms of being able to access data much more quickly. You know, go on 360, you can look at who's funding what. I mean, that just, we weren't able to do that 5 years ago. So there's a, you know, there are platforms that we can really build on now. It feels to me that the opportunities for collaboration and the opportunities for impact are greater than they have been. And I think, you know, your point, Gero, about thinking about the total assets, what we're doing with our total assets when we're approaching that is, yes, is an exciting place to be. So I'm going to thank you all hugely for really interesting, expert, challenging and thought-provoking conversation there. It's been really great to have you here. We're now bringing in Sarah Willis, who chairs our Violence Against Young People Forum. And Sarah, you're going to say a little bit about the in real life meeting next week.
I am. Great to be here. Great conversation to listen to, and very appropriate in many ways. I think the subject of collaboration and connection, but then the point of love and connection, and I wanted to add in hope, is definitely what young people who are affected by violence definitely need. Love, connection and hope. So I've added that one in. So I am chair of the Violence Affecting Young People subgroup. We are meeting next week. We look forward to welcoming those of you that can come. It's really going to be about how do we make this group purposeful? So for me, it's always asking the question, what will be different for a young person if we sit in a room as a group of funders and decide to do something differently? How will that impact on them? And in order to help us with that, along with our discussion, Killian Troy Donovan from Digital Labs and Incubator at Social Finance is going to join us to introduce voices of young people and how you enable greater alignment and collaboration. So we'll use that as a framework. So we're really going to be asking questions. How can we work more collaboratively, closely together to increase our alignment and impact the way that we drive, that is driven by the authentic voices of young people, so that we really include their voices, so that young people and communities are at the heart of solutions, but there's this reciprocity between us as funders and those young people and communities. So if you want to make a difference in this space, which is very overpopulated in terms of the work that's happening around violence affecting young people, but we have an increased level of inequity that's amplified during the pandemic, which is driving increased levels of violence. So it definitely is something that we need to tackle collaboratively. So I look forward to seeing you next week.
That sounds like a really exciting meeting, Sarah. Thank you so much for that. So we are, it's only 11:20. So you get a whole 10 minutes back before your next meeting. There's loads of useful links in the chat. If you haven't managed to look at them already, we'll be sending them out anyway. And don't forget, we've got our final Zoom room, our Zoom meeting tomorrow, which is on recovery. And another great lineup for that. So hope to see some of you tomorrow. Thank you for everyone who came today, and see you in real life next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Geraldine. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, bye.